The governments, the media, and sometimes both have been using our own psychology against us for decades, and Uri Bezmenov called it a long while ago. Watch what's coming.
Overt and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type.
My name is Casey. I'm the Rumble Right Dad. I've been a therapist for more than 13 years. And over that time, I've seen my industry be ideologically captured by socialism, by ideologues, by various other lobbies. And I'm here to try to tell the based truth about what might be helpful remaining in the psychology and therapy industry. Let's go with, how is your psychology being used against you? Uri Bezmenov was a former KGB agent who defected in the 1980s, and he ended up sending a warning to Americans at that time, and some of his clips are still very widely circulated among those of us who might be conspiracy theorists, aka the prophets of today. Not that I'm a prophet, certainly not, but there are people who are basically predicting the future. Just look into the next person across the bow who's calling a conspiracy theorist.
Opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions.
Uri Bezmenov starts by saying ideological subversion is a slow process of changing the perception of reality to such an extent that despite the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions. Uri Bezmenov said, "You do not need to invade America, you need to demoralize her." And that was used in 4 stages of demoralization, which was undermining values, religion, and history. Destabilization, breaking down institutions like the family. That's why this channel exists, to try to reinstitute the family and be strong against incursions of idiocracy like this. And also education and law, destabilizing all of those things. Stage 3 would be crisis, creating chaos, division, fear. Think about 2020, the summer of love, along with a great many race riots from 2012 to 2025, and the continued race perpetuation, as these are the reasons we should be divided, not the reasons that we might come together. Sounds like the recipe's working on Uri Bezmenov's account. And number 4, normalization, installing new values under the guise of progress. Now, does that sound like anything that we're going through in the recent history?
It's slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate 1 generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them.
With the premise that Mr. Bezmenov lays out, let's look at the ways that the media has begun to use these exact tactics to try to overload the system so that no one can tell what's true anymore.
CBS 4 News produces. But
we are concerned about the troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 The first tactic that they used is called cognitive overload. When there's too much information, people become overwhelmed and they become passive, according to Robert Cialdini, psychologist and author of the book Influence. The second tactic that the media will use is desensitization. Of course, they're trying to desensitize us to things like violence, spicy materials, vulgarity, and a variety of other progressive ideals, truthfully, like the church being evil, through a variety of movies. There's just so many examples of ways that they're trying to desensitize us to certain ideas, and they flood the market with these, making us more apt to just accept them as normal.
Of the United States society. The moralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information.
One that I've talked about quite frequently on this channel is originated by B.F. Skinner, and that is called operant conditioning, which means that they give us a reward when we have things like engagement on social media. So you post something dramatic, it gets a lot of clicks. That is used to continue to reward you for posting dramatic things, obviously. And then they use a variable reward schedule, which means 1 in every 6 posts you make will make that much more engagement, thusly keeping you interested. It might be 1 in 17, it might be 1 in 3, but those variable rewards keep it interesting, which is the same psychological technique that they use in gambling machines and slot machines to keep us going.
Next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never...
Lastly, and one that has maybe the most exemplary ways that it can be identified on the internet, is narrative farming. Now, there are so many ways that the media will just out and out lie to you, but one of the most insidious ways that they will lie to you is by lies of omission, which means that they make a claim and then they won't tell the entirety of the story because they believe that we're such dullards that we can only handle a 30-second clip, and then they wonder why Joe Rogan is getting 10 times the views that many of these cable news channels are, and they say, well, we need a Joe Rogan of the left. Well, it turns out you had one. His name was Joe Rogan, and he just knew that people could handle more than 15 seconds of conversation on any certain topic.
Crisis, it may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition.
According to Uri Bezmenov, the nuclear family, the traditional family, was the #1 target. He said, as long as the family unit is strong, you cannot fully control the population. And this is why I press forward to try to make our families strong again, to try to encourage us as men and as leaders in our community, especially in America, but also abroad, to not fall prey to this tactic that was given to us very, very overtly by a former KGB officer. And quite frankly, I'm not so foolish or naive to think that the Russians have some grand scheme that they've run against us. But if they had, I doubt they would have been as exacting and as accurate as this narrative-driven psychological conditioning has been against the American populace. So keep the family strong, and we will ultimately reap the results of fighting against the Bezmenov curse. So if the Russians were accurate, or if Bezmenov was right, and this is actually the playbook that's being run either by them or by another entity, for instance, possibly even our own government, here's what they might do to try to weaken that traditional family. Redefine masculinity as toxic. Check. Mock fatherhood is useless. Check. Check. Treat motherhood as a trap. 3 for 3. And then normalize isolation, casual sex, and consumerism. If you combine that with some of the immersive technologies that are coming out nowadays that are even much more tempting than what Bezmenov could have imagined, like video games or spicy material online, this makes for a recipe that is an immeasurable poison of psychology that's been used against us. So what can we do? Guard your mind first and foremost. Certain types of media will lead to moral decay, and a lot of that can be found on Netflix or some of these other large carriers that have a lot of poison it's just embedded in their material, and they will not allow for anything that's not narrative driven to be pushed to the top of their algorithm. So be very careful. What's most popular is probably the main street of media. For a reason, it might actually be poisoning us. Second, strengthen your family. If you do not have time as a family apart from media, then we are allowing those messages to sink in more than the messages that we might teach as a father or as a parental unit. Please do not neglect to be the primary source for the information for your family. 3, speak out. Do not be silent against the incursion against the American traditional family. It is being led by someone. You could say it could be a collection of forces, but I guarantee you they are good at what they're doing, which makes me think it's probably the one that's the king of all discouragement. But if you don't believe along those lines, I don't shame you for that. But there is someone who is very good at what they're doing, who has demoralized the American family. Number 4, reconnect with purpose. Bezmenov said that only spiritual awakening can reverse ideological subversion, which makes it very classic Bezmenov recipe that they would go after the church, that they would try to disparage people from faith, that they would demand popes, for instance, that might have left-wing value systems or systems that might actually undermine the church, and they knew that. Now, you must have moral courage, because the Bezmenov curse comes for all those who speak out. So if you're going to speak out against this, you're going to catch hell. And that's because too many people have bitten the poison apple and believed their own smelling farts that they are headed down the right road, when in fact they're leading to the moral decay, which was exactly what Bezmenov calculated in the first place. Remember, the forces that are at work do not need to censor you if they've been able to rewire your brain. Here at this channel, we are attempting to press truth forward so that you can cross those wires and be able to once again live a life that's filled with truth and with a family that has strong traditional values. If this can be any use to you, please like, share, and subscribe. And thank you so much for not buying into the Bezmenov curse.